problem that the United States is facing in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia is our foreign policy. And our foreign policy is basically detrimental to these two regions for a multitude of reasons. And basically, these are the influences of the foreign lobbies of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, and Israel. You also factor in that you have the Pentagon, the State Department, different entities with similar goals and agendas. Nevertheless, since at least the Carter administration, we have been a ultra-nationalist type of country in regards to our geopolitics overall and how we treat certain countries. Many Arab countries, such as Jordan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Libya, Syria, were once pan-Arabist countries and enjoyed a reasonable sense of democracy, but they also were led by socialist principles themselves. And most of these countries had leaders that didn't want any Western influence to regulate the oil market. A lot of these countries also enjoyed global trade, whether it be food, clothing. This is the reason why, and one of the reasons why, the destabilization of these countries was a primary goal of the United States and Great Britain. And you wonder why they wanted to destroy what is left of these productive countries, in which they wrote a paper in 1952 called The Problem of Nationalism, which is stored at the British Foreign Office, in which it details how these countries are to be subverted internally and to have implementing Arab leaders that are catering to Western influence. Much later on, you have other documents from other plans and from the neoconservative and the Israeli Zionist governments, one of them being the Paul Wolfowitz Doctrine, the other one being the Oded Yinon Plan, and then later on, a military document called the Project for a New American Century, in which it discusses military expansionism over a period of time. Now, what is the problem with our foreign policy, and why is it so detrimental to the countries? Well, for the past at least 25 years, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we have created more enemies than we should have had by drone striking or carpet bombing cities in the Arab countries themselves, by eliminating and going to war against these Arab leadership states who once were led under socialist principles, nationalist principles, which kept the ultra-Orthodox religious sector in check, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and, of course, Al-Qaeda. But now, most of these groups have expanded. Why? Because we as a country have allowed the U.S. military to become the answer to destabilize these countries, instead of having a roundtable discussion with these Arab world leaders. And the Arab world leaders have a committee called the Arab World League, in which they invite Arab leaderships to talk about benefiting for the future of their countries and the region itself. But it seems that we have three countries who have basically committed war to many of these countries, and that's the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia sees a lot of these countries as kafir or munafiq, which aren't Islamic, these Arab countries. That's what they're trying to say. A Sunni Shia war, a country that's led by its Wahhabi principles and which is quite favorable to the United States, Saudi Arabia. With Israel, they just want the entire region to be completely at war with one another so they wouldn't concentrate on the country itself. In so much that Israel also has the full backing of the United States military, which is the reason why you won't see many Arab organizations, terrorist organizations, invade Israel, due to the fact that Israel is a small country and their security is quite strict, and it's hard to invade a country which is surrounded by walls and military-led station posts. And of course, one of the primary reasons for the Arabs to hate the Israeli Zionist government is that it is committing one of the worst human rights crimes in the world against the Palestinian people. And this is causing an uproar with the ultra-Orthodox community. But it seems that the United States itself is quite ignorant regarding Arab politics, and they don't really care much for it or understanding of it. What they do know is that they could use violence as a mean of communication. And this is the primary problem that we're seeing today. We are assisting Saudi Arabia in the greatest human rights violations in the world against the Houthis and the Yemenis, by giving them millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons and aid to a corrupt country, Saudi Arabia. It's an ultra-Orthodox country. It is a country that promotes Wahhabist ideals and created most of the Salafi Wahhabi organizations you see today. And of course, I don't need to mention, but I will, the majority of the 9/11 hijacking team came from Saudi Arabia themselves. 15 of the 19 hijackers came from here. And of course, they fund Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram in South Africa, the Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, and take your name for it, Ansar al-Sharia, Islamic State, and the Levant, numerous groups. I can go on giving you a full list. And they're doing this in hopes that they won't return the favor back to Saudi Arabia. It's almost like a form of blackmail, what's going on. And knowing that Saudi Arabia also has the American military to back them, because we have the Democratic and Republican congressional leaders financially invested with Saudi Arabia and their oil reserves. That's the reason why we won't detract from them, in which we should. They're a terrorist-led country, and they promote Wahhabi ideals, and they're terrible for foreign policy in the Middle East. If you're not a Gulf partner, most of the Shiite countries are being subjugated by the Western coalition under military invasive military involvement in bombing these countries. And when we do, we're creating more enemies, creating more terrorists in the long run. And so what can we do to change our foreign policy? Well, I think it's a pipe dream, really. Nobody in the top leadership in the congressional district today in the United States will ever talk about the harmful effects of Israel and the AIPAC lobby, which influences our government and the Pentagon itself, even though we may have one or two, three people that talk about the detrimental, influential effects of Saudi Arabia. But that's not going to really change things, is it? But if you talk critically about Israeli politics and how it influences our government, guess what? You're being absconded for the time being, and you probably won't be elected again. That's how much influence the Zionist-led lobby has inside the United States, and we allowed it to happen. We sat back and we allowed it to happen, allowed this influence to go deeper into our U.S. government. And meanwhile, the public at large is very ignorant about this because the media ain't going to talk about it. Most of the media is basically an arm of the intelligence apparatuses and the Pentagon itself, the legacy media, CNN, Fox, ABC, take your pick. It doesn't matter. But what they do is they promote divisive-led human constructs in which most of America is basically in conflict with one another. And can I just relate the obvious to you? Look what's happening in the past year. The political divide in this country is quite polarizing. And while the media is feeding you this garbage about non-important information, real information regarding the global atmosphere and how we treat other people is being largely ignored and underreported. And in fact, if you want to find out what's going on regarding our geopolitics and the regions itself, you have to go outside the United States and read about foreign publications, Al Jazeera, for one. This is a problem. And this is a problem that's only going to be exasperated in the future. And of course, the looming war of Iran that's hanging all over our heads will be the worst disaster, even worse than Iraq. And which the disaster will not just be met on the Iranian people, but to the United States citizenry themselves, because a large section of the Pentagon budget will come out of our public works, Social Security, healthcare, education. All these institutions are slowly evaporating, which is affecting us, the American people, as a whole. Are we in the streets fighting for this? No. We're fighting for about LGBTQT rights, Second Amendment, the rights to bear arms, women's rights, the rights to have certain things as men. I mean, these are important rights, but most of the pros and cons of these avenues are, again, ignored by a congressional district. They don't care about you. That's why I don't vote. But the larger, bigger issues at hand that affect not just Americans, but I'm talking about the global community as a whole, we're not protesting for that. We should be in front of the White House talking about a change, a real change. I'm talking about a real change. Not a promise, not a declaration made from a executive order. I want real change. And real change is not going to come unless we stop conflicting with one another and act as a singular unit as human beings and go and demand it, and if so, by force. I'm sorry to imply that we may need to force the change ourselves, but that's what the Founding Fathers promised. A government for the people, by the people. The old story about when they were writing the Declaration of Independence, in which Benjamin Franklin, a co-signee, walks out of the town hall and a woman comes up and asks him, "What have you created?" And Franklin responds, "A republic, if you could keep it." And I would submit to you that we lost control of it over 125 years ago. The tree of liberty is painted by the blood of tyrants. Are we not led by tyrants? Is not Trump a tyrant? Is not Joe Biden a tyrant? There are symptoms. The disease is the system of government, and it has grown beyond our control. And I blame the people for allowing it to happen. We have to make real change before it's too late for everyone else and for us, and importantly, the environment as well. It's eroding. The discourse is over now. The time for talk is over. We've had our chance, and so did they. They blew it. But the one thing that they have going for themselves is that the American people are hungry, are poor, are ignorant, and dependent upon the government to give them assistance in these areas, when we should be assisting ourselves. This election is going to prove one thing to the world: how utterly divided, destitute, and unsound we are as a country, by continuing to vote and to pick sides and to become like the Cro-Magnon period of us versus them. We haven't evolved, not in our way we treat others, and not to how we treat the country and how we treat the planet. If the American people can't see that how we treat others with our disastrous foreign policy and our disastrous wars and conflicts in the Middle East, which have reached over 2 million people, the continuation of drone striking Arab countries, the continuation of supporting dictatorships, monarchies that are detrimental to peace in the region. If you can't see how we treat others, how are we going to see how we treat ourselves? Because much like what Malcolm X said once, the chickens are coming home to roost, and sure enough, it is. And we have allowed it to happen for decades.